Hey everyone, welcome to Legal Studies. I'm Miss Matts. I'll be your teacher for this semester and I'm super excited to get started. So first off, I guess just a bit about me. I'm dreadfully sorry I couldn't be here in our first week this term. I'm actually overseas, but you're in great hands with Mr. Lower and I'm really keen to get stuck into it next week. To be honest, funny thing about me is that I was originally doing a law degree. I lasted about a week and a half, and then I transferred to arts, then I transferred to teaching. So, yeah, I'm not exactly a legal expert, but I think this is a fantastic subject which allows you to discuss these types of things. And if you are interested in a law career, I definitely recommend it. I was going to tell you about my experience with the law, but I thought it would be perhaps better in person. It's a bit of a long story, so anyway. If I was here, I would have asked you guys all what your names are and why you chose legal, what interests you about the law, and did you have any fascinating or scandalous run-ins with the law? Keen to hear those next week. Most people, get into the law via Law and Order or Suits, so if that's you, that's totally fine as well. Moving on, I just want to talk about my expectations for this semester, as even though you're all year 11s, I still think these are really important to discuss. I do expect you follow them all. So respect in all its forms. I'm not sure why that's like that, but not only respect for me, but for each other, for the importance of your learning and for our space. You're not above the law or anyone, okay? So if you're being rude in class, you're also being rude to other people, not just me. Please don't be afraid to share your thoughts during class, because this is a subject about current events and our everyday lives, so it's really important you provide your opinion on that. And I really admire those who have the courage to express their opinions in a subject like this. Please ask questions if you're unsure on anything. Honesty is the best policy. I would love a positive attitude towards your learning in any subject, of course, and this means doing your personal best and using class time effectively. Always keep up to date with Daymap and Google Classroom. I'm not really using Moodle anymore. And come to class prepared and on time. Don't abuse your laptops and work hard and have fun. So, just a bit of a spiel about why legal is an important and useful subject. As you can see in this image here, I think one of the most great things is that it makes you a less ignorant person, which is always a positive thing. So you will learn important information about our society and the system that we live in, how it functions and how this all affects our everyday lives. Basically, it makes you more educated as a citizen and more empowered. So you're empowered with knowledge about our system, and therefore you can make more informed opinions and judgments, about voting, about, laws, about even just politics or international issues and so on. Another thing is that this subject kind of teaches you to think critically about issues. So not just accept what the news tells you, don't just accept what you read. It's about thinking about it critically, which actually is useful in any subject. Which leads to the next point, in that the skills you learn in this subject are transferable to any other area. So, writing clearly and effectively, researching, critical inquiry, problem solving, the list goes on. So it's definitely a worthwhile subject, and even if you want to pursue it in year 12, I think it's possibly one of the easiest subjects to get really high marks in due to the nature of it. But anyway, I'll talk about that further. Moving on, just a bit about the course structure and assessment. So we've got 2 tasks in the folio, 1 issue study individual task and a presentation, which will be paired. This will be a test and an in-class essay. And the main topics for the course are these 4 topics. We'll go into those in more depth next week. Here is the rough assessment outline and course outline for the semester. Ignore this, we don't have 11 weeks, that was from last term, but this is the general gist. So you have 4 summative assessments. We're going to do 2 tests, and I'm going to take the best mark out of those 2. So you'll do 2, but I'll take your highest mark out of each one. And with the exam, which is not summative at the end. This is available on Google Classroom as well. A few other things which I think are really important before we get real stuck into it about legal studies. So this subject, unfortunately, but also a great thing, is that it's really content driven. You have to be prepared to learn lots of concepts, to be willing to note take, remember, revise, because it's not like English where you just learn skills and apply them. You do that here, but you have to actually learn the concepts. And if you fall behind, it can be really hard to catch up. So please be aware of that. It's a writing and language-based subject, which means a lot of the information is conveyed, through language, through writing. Oh my God, sorry. Discussion is important, so discussing the legal issues involved, asking questions, and one thing I really, really recommend for you to do is get a book, a folder, or some sort of note-taking system that works for you. Science has proved that handwriting notes makes you remember them more, so I suggest handwriting notes, but if you want to do them online, you can, but get a folder, get a book, get something to put all your notes in to sort of consolidate your knowledge of this subject. And we will be borrowing the textbook tomorrow. Hopefully there's enough in the library because I know there was a bit of a shortage. To be honest, the textbook is kind of crappy. Most of the stuff you'll need, I'll provide to you anyway. Any questions so far, please write them down or email me if they're urgent, and I'll discuss them next week. Moving on, I wanted to discuss with the class, why do we have laws? Hopefully you guys can consider this on your own. Maybe just pause the video and have a think. Why do we have these? What is their function? What is their purpose? What do they represent? Interesting thing to think about. Moving on, just a really quick intro to law in Australia now, before you guys go off and do an activity. So where did law come from in Australia? It came from England. Yep, because we were colonised by the English. So when governors ruled certain colonies, they made laws for that colony, and this established parliaments, courts, and so on in the British Westminster system model. Indigenous customary law was not recognised, and the prevailing influence on lawmaking was that of, white-dominated, male-dominated society. So our laws really stem from this patriarchal white man society. So the colonies that were formed and the laws that were made there really had no recognition of the rights of Indigenous people to their land. And this is reflected in the changes that have happened to our laws over the years. And interestingly, Australia was claimed to be terra nullius when the English arrived, if you learnt your history, which means the land belonging to no one, or empty land. So they just claimed it and thought we can put our own laws and ignore the other ones. Another thing important to know about legal studies is the idea of rights and responsibilities. So, you always talk about, I know my rights, human rights. What are these? So we expect that the lawmakers will make laws that uphold our rights and values. So, we value personal safety, we value the right to free speech, we value a clean environment, and so on. And then therefore rights also come with responsibilities to give effect to those rights. So we have responsibilities to drive safely on the road, or to not put anyone in harm in the law system. Yep. Now I want to talk about one last thing, which are the two sources of law in Australia. Sorry, I'm going through all this quite quickly. I just trying to get as much in as possible before next week. So in Australia, there are two main sources of law. Have a just think to yourself for a moment. Do you know perhaps what they would be? Obviously, the first one is Parliament. Yep, which have state and federal parliaments, because we're a federal system, like America, who's got the federal government and various state governments. So two sources. The first one is Parliament. Here we elect democratically representatives to make laws for us, and this underpins the idea of representative government. Yep, it's our sort of democratic function, so somewhat. Parliament's powers are prescribed, so they're written down in the Constitution, about a 100-year-old document, and these laws are made in federal and state parliaments, as I said. These laws are called statute law, otherwise known as legislation, acts of parliament, enacted law, and so on. Generally, we talk about statute, legislation, or acts. They all mean the same thing, and I'm sure you've heard those terms before. The second source of law, if you're not sure, is actually the courts. So judges, otherwise known as case law or common law. So this is made when judges settle disputes in superior court. So the magistrates' court is a lower court, and they don't make case law. It is a system inherited from England, But the High Court Australia is the most superior Australian court to define this area of the law. Case law is also known as precedent. So when a case has been decided and the judge has written their judgment, that's called a precedent. They've set a bar, they've set a standard, a precedent, which has different influences on future cases. How is it made? So how is case law made? Basically, when no legislation or statute exists, they create a new principle, much like negligence was created, and they also make it when giving meaning to laws. So sometimes Parliament write crappy laws, or they don't make sense, and so when they come before a case, the judge gives meaning to that law, and therefore creates a new legal principle. Another thing to be aware of is that the government, the executive, also make laws. So governments can get power from Parliament through enabling acts to make stuff called delegated legislation. So it's delegated from Parliament to the government bodies, such as the Immigration Department, who then make immigration regulations. It's made by government departments, local councils, and yes, like I said, it's normally known as regulations. But the two main sources are case law and Parliament-made law. Okay, moving right along. Therefore, thinking about all these sources of law, we kind of have this thing called three arms of the law. It's really important you understand what these three arms are because they kind of underpin the whole course. So the first one is legislative, which means Parliament, because they make legislation. The second is the executive, which is government. Yep. So the Prime Minister is the head of the executive. He's the head of the government in Australia. And Stephen Marshall is the head of the executive in South Australia, sadly. And the judiciary is the courts, so the judges. And these make up ledge, okay? And as you can see in this diagram, it's demonstrated. So ledge, the legislation has the Parliament, executive, the Governor-General is involved in government departments, and the judicial has the High Court and other courts at federal level. One last thing before I let you go, I'm really sorry for this dragging on, is the concept of sovereignty. You might have heard this word before, you might even know what it means. Excellent if you do. If you don't, basically in the legal system it applies to who has more authority and power. So when different sources of law exist, so you have the Parliament, you have the courts, you have government, it's kind of inevitable that they'll clash, they'll come into conflict. So the rules of sovereignty prescribe that Parliament-made law overrides case law and regulations. So if a Parliament law comes into conflict with a judge-made law, Parliament law wins. Has more sovereignty. However, there's one exception in that case law made in the High Court's interpretation of the Constitution. So when a constitutional issue goes to the High Court, Parliament cannot overrule that decision. They don't have the power to do that, to protect the constitutional rights. And federal law overrides state law. So if what's his name, Turnbull makes a law, it can't, Stephen Marshall can't make one that's contradictory. And this is per the inconsistency rule in the Constitution. Finally, case law created in the High Court, let's say, overrides case law created in inferior courts. So if you look at the court hierarchy, the High Court of Australia overrides all of these. And so the Supreme Court would override the District Court because it's a superior court and has greater sovereignty, if that makes sense. We'll go into more detail next time. So for today, that's all my talking. Please go on to Google Classroom, we already on there, complete the introductory task, which is like a little worksheet attached. And if you don't have the code already, this is it. All the best for this week. Please do as best as you can to engage with the content while I'm not here. And thank you for listening.